The Snake River doesn't forgive mistakes, and it certainly doesn't care about mercy. When a young mother and her infant were swept into the icy torrent in 1883, death seemed certain. But they didn't know that the only man watching from the cliffs was the very bounty hunter hired to kill them. This is the story of Clara and the rider who defied fate. The Wyoming Territory was a hard place for men, but it was hell for a woman alone. Clara O'Malley knew this, yet she whipped the reins of her stolen buckboard wagon harder, her knuckles white against the cracked leather. Beside her, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket inside a crate nailed to the floorboards, lay 6-month-old baby William. He was sleeping, unaware that every man in Laramie County was hunting them down. The sky above had turned the color of a bruised plum, unleashing a torrential downpour that turned the trail into a mud-slicked chute. Clara wasn't running from the law. She was running from the lawless. Sheriff Josiah Miller, a man with a badge on his chest and rot in his soul, had framed her for the murder of her own husband. He wanted the O'Malley Ranch, the water rights, and he wanted Clara gone. "Come on, Betsy, move!" Clara screamed at the mare pulling the wagon. They hit the banks of the Grey Bull River at a gallop. The bridge was gone, washed away by the spring melt and the storm. Clara looked back. Through the sheets of rain, she saw the dark shapes of riders on the ridge. Miller's posse. She had no choice. She drove the wagon into the ford. The water hit the wheels with the force of a hammer. The cold was shocking, instantly soaking her skirts. For a moment, the wagon held, floating buoyantly. Then, a massive submerged log, carried by the current, slammed into the rear axle. The wood shattered with a sound like a gunshot. The wagon tipped violently. Clara was thrown into the freezing churn. She gasped, swallowing gritty water, her heavy dress dragging her down like an anchor. She kicked, surfacing just in time to see the crate with William, sliding toward the open water. "No!" she screamed, a sound torn from her throat that was lost in the roar of the river. She clawed toward the wagon, but the current was too strong. She was trapped against the splintered wood, pinned by the force of the river, watching her baby drift away into the white water. High above on the canyon rim, Caleb Thorne sat atop his black stallion, Midnight. He pulled his duster tight around his neck, watching the disaster unfold below. Caleb was a tracker, a man who sold his gun to the highest bidder. He had a contract in his pocket, signed by Sheriff Miller, $500 for the widow O'Malley, dead or alive. He watched the wagon break. He saw the woman fighting not for her life, but for the bundle drifting downstream. Caleb had done many dark things since the war ended, but he had never watched a child die. "Damn it all to hell," Caleb growled. He didn't think. He spurred Midnight, sending the horse sliding down the shale slope. It was a suicide descent. Rocks clattered and sparked under the hooves. They hit the water with a massive splash downstream of the woman. Caleb didn't steer for Clara. He steered for the bundle. The horse swam hard, its powerful muscles fighting the current. Caleb leaned far out of the saddle, hanging by one spur and the strength of his thighs. His leather-gloved hand snatched the blanket just as the crate capsized. A wail pierced the air. The baby was alive. With a grunt of exertion, Caleb swung the infant up, tucking him inside his duster. But the mother was still pinned, her head dipping below the surface. Caleb turned Midnight back into the teeth of the river. He reached the wreckage just as Clara's strength failed. She looked up, her eyes wide with terror, seeing a dark rider looming over her. She didn't see a savior. She saw a grim reaper. Caleb reached down, grabbing her by the back of her dress. "Let go of the wood," he roared over the river's thunder. She hesitated, terrified. "Trust me or you both die." Clara let go. Caleb hauled her up behind his saddle, her wet body slamming against his back. Midnight struggled, hooves slipping on the riverbed, before finding purchase and lunging up the muddy bank. They collapsed onto the wet grass, gasping, shivering, and alive. Caleb dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud. He pulled the crying infant from his coat and handed him to the woman. Clara clutched William to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. She looked up at the man who had saved them. She saw the scar running down his cheek, the cold blue eyes, and the Winchester rifle scabbard on his saddle. She recognized him from the whispers in town. "You're Caleb Thorne?" she chattered through blue lips. "The bounty hunter." Caleb stared at her, the rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He rested his hand on his revolver. "I am." "Are you going to kill us now?" Clara asked, clutching William tighter, defiantly raising her chin despite her exhaustion. Caleb looked at the river, then back at the posse gathering on the far bank, unable to cross. He spat tobacco juice into the mud. "Not today, ma'am," Caleb said, his voice like gravel. "But that don't mean you're safe." The storm raged for 3 hours, forcing them to take shelter in an abandoned miner's cave halfway up the ridge. Caleb built a fire using dry brush and driftwood, the flames casting long, dancing shadows against the stone walls. Clara sat near the heat, stripping the wet clothes off William and wrapping him in Caleb's dry saddle blanket. She was painfully aware of the man sitting across the fire from her. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and mechanical. He hadn't spoken a word since the riverbank. "Why?" Clara finally asked, the silence becoming suffocating. "Sheriff Miller put a price on my head. $500 is a year's wages for a cowhand." Caleb didn't look up from the gun. "I ain't a cowhand, and I don't kill babies. The contract didn't mention a child." "Miller doesn't care about the child," Clara said bitterly. "He only cares that William is the heir to the 00 ranch. If we die, the land reverts to the county, and Miller buys it for pennies." Caleb paused. He snapped the breech of the rifle shut and looked at her. "Miller told me you killed your husband, shot him in his sleep for the insurance money." "My husband was shot in the back while fixing a fence," Clara said, her voice shaking with rage. "By a rifle with a long-range scope. Miller's deputy found the body before I even knew he was missing. They planted the gun under my mattress." Caleb's eyes narrowed. He was a man who knew the weight of a lie. He studied Clara's face. He saw fear, yes, but he didn't see deception. He saw the same look he'd seen in soldiers who knew they were fighting a losing war, but fought anyway. "Miller supplied me with the horse and the ammo," Caleb said quietly. "He told me you were a witch of a woman. Said you'd charm a man before you slit his throat." Clara laughed, a hollow, dry sound. "Do I look like a witch to you, Mr. Thorne? Or do I look like a mother who just lost everything except her son?" Caleb stood up and walked to the mouth of the cave. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy mist over the valley. "Miller is waiting at the pass. He knows there's only one way out of this canyon if the river is flooded. He'll be guarding the Devil's Throat Bridge." "Then we're trapped," Clara whispered, holding William close. Caleb turned back to her. The firelight caught the harsh angles of his face, softening them for a brief second. "You're trapped. I can ride out any time I want." Clara's heart sank. "So you're leaving us?" Caleb walked over to his saddlebags. He pulled out a tin of beans and a strip of jerky, tossing them to her. "Eat. You need your strength." "For what?" "For the ride," Caleb said, adjusting his hat. "I hate getting wet for nothing. If Miller lied to me about the kid, he lied about the money, and I don't take kindly to being played for a fool." The atmosphere in the cave shifted. It wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was an alliance born of necessity. As Clara ate, she watched Caleb. He wasn't the monster the stories made him out to be. There was a code in him, twisted and buried deep, perhaps, but it was there. My husband, his name was Thomas, Clara said softly. He admired you. He saw you ride in the rodeo in Cheyenne 3 years ago. Caleb stiffened. Thomas O'Malley? Yes. Caleb looked into the fire, a shadow of pain crossing his eyes. I knew Thomas. We rode together briefly, driving cattle up from Texas before he settled down. He was a good man, better than most. He never told me. Men don't talk about the bad times, Caleb muttered. Miller killed a friend of mine. The connection hung in the air, electric and fragile. The dynamic had changed. Caleb Thorne wasn't just saving a bounty, he was saving his friend's legacy. Get some sleep, Clara, Caleb said, using her name for the first time. We ride at first light, and it's going to get ugly. Morning broke with a cold, grey light. The mist clung to the pines as Caleb and Clara mounted Midnight. The stallion was strong, but carrying 2 adults and a child over rocky terrain would slow them down. We can't outrun them, Caleb said, as they navigated the steep trail leading toward the Devil's Throat, a narrow suspension bridge spanning a chasm 200 feet deep. So we have to outsmart them. How? Clara asked, her arms wrapped around Caleb's waist, William strapped to her chest. Miller thinks I'm working for him. He doesn't know I pulled you out. As far as he knows, you drowned, and I'm coming to collect. He'll see me on the horse. Not if you're under the duster, Caleb commanded. Cover yourself and the boy. Don't move. Don't breathe. They approached the bridge. As Caleb predicted, 3 men blocked the entrance. In the center sat Sheriff Josiah Miller, a large man with a thick mustache and a star that shone too brightly for such a dirty town. Caleb rode closer, his face impassive. He kept one hand on the reins, the other resting lazily near his hip. Thorne, Miller shouted, his voice booming. I saw the wagon go in. Did you find the body? Caleb stopped the horse 10 yards away. Water is fast, Sheriff. Wagon smashed to bits. And the woman? Miller asked, his eyes scanning the riverbanks greedily. Gone, Caleb lied smoothly. Swept under the rapids. No one survives that. Miller grinned, a predatory showing of yellow teeth. Good. Saves me the hangman's fee. And the brat? River took him too. Miller chuckled, taking a cigar from his pocket. A tragedy. Truly. Well, ride on in, Thorne. I'll have the deputy write you a draft for half the bounty. Since you didn't bring back the body, I can't pay full price. Under the coat, Clara stiffened. Caleb felt her tension against his back. The deal was 500, Miller, Caleb said, his voice dropping an octave. Dead or alive. I watched them die. That counts. Reviewing the terms, are we? Miller signaled his 2 deputies. They shifted their shotguns. You're a drifter, Thorne. You take what I give you, or you take a bullet. This was the moment, the twist Caleb had been waiting for. I don't take charity, Josiah, Caleb said. In one fluid motion, Caleb threw his duster open. Clara revealed herself, not with a scream, but with Caleb's spare Colt revolver in her hand. She's alive, one deputy shouted. Before they could raise their shotguns, Caleb drew. Bang! Bang! 2 shots, impossibly fast. The deputies fell from their saddles. Miller, panicked, spurred his horse backward onto the bridge. Hang on, Caleb yelled to Clara. He kicked Midnight into a gallop. They charged onto the wooden bridge. Miller fired wildly over his shoulder, a bullet grazing Caleb's arm. The bridge swayed violently under the galloping hooves. You can't kill me, Miller screamed, reaching the far side and jumping off his horse to take cover behind a boulder. I own this county. Caleb pulled Midnight to a halt in the middle of the bridge. It was a standoff. Miller had the high ground on the far side. The path behind them was blocked by the dead deputy's spooked horses. "Clara," Caleb said, blood trickling down his sleeve. "Can you shoot?" "I'm a rancher's wife," she said, cocking the hammer of the Colt. "I don't miss." "Cover me." Caleb dismounted on the swaying bridge. He pulled his Winchester from the scabbard. He wasn't aiming at Miller. He was aiming at the support cables of the bridge on the far side, the side Miller was hiding near. "What are you doing?" Clara cried. "Cutting off his path." Caleb gritted his teeth. Miller popped up to fire. Clara squeezed the trigger. Her shot hit the rock inches from Miller's face, sending stone fragments into his eyes. He screamed, blinded momentarily. Caleb took aim. He didn't shoot the man. He shot the thick iron bolt anchoring the bridge cables into the cliffside. The Winchester cracked. The bolt shattered. With a groan of twisting metal, the far side of the bridge collapsed. Miller, thinking he was safe behind the rock, realized too late that the ground he was standing on was part of the bridge's foundation structure. The wooden planks fell away. Miller scrambled, clawing at the dirt, but the momentum was too great. He fell, screaming, 200 feet into the gorge below. The bridge swung wildly, slamming Caleb and Clara against the rails, but the near side, their side, held firm. They were left hanging over the abyss, adrenaline pumping through their veins, silence finally returning to the canyon. The silence that followed the collapse of the bridge was heavier than the gunfire. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the canyon and the distant, hungry roar of the river, 200 feet below, a beast that had swallowed Sheriff Miller whole. Caleb and Clara lay flat against the wooden planks of the bridge's remaining section, their chests heaving. The structure groaned beneath them, swaying sickeningly in the wind, held up by only a few stressed cables. "Don't look down," Caleb rasped, his voice tight with pain. He grabbed Clara's arm with his good hand, guiding her toward the solid rock of the cliff edge. "Just keep your eyes on the ridge. Move." They scrambled up the steep incline, boots slipping on loose shale, until they finally collapsed onto the solid, grassy earth of the plateau. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape began to ebb away, leaving a crushing exhaustion in its wake. Caleb leaned back against the rough bark of a ponderosa pine, his face pale beneath the grime and stubble. Blood was soaking through the sleeve of his duster, a dark stain spreading across the worn leather. Clara, her hands trembling, checked the bundle strapped to her chest. Little William was awake, blinking against the sudden sunlight breaking through the storm clouds, miraculously unharmed. He let out a soft coo, a sound so innocent it seemed out of place in such a violent land. Clara took a deep, shuddering breath and crawled over to Caleb. "Let me see it," she demanded softly, her voice regaining the steeliness that had kept her alive for the last 2 days. "It's just a scratch," Caleb grunted, trying to wave her away, but he winced when he shifted. "A scratch doesn't bleed like that. Hold still." Clara tore a long strip from her petticoat, the white fabric stark against the mud on her hands. She peeled back his coat and shirt. The bullet had furrowed deep into the muscle of his upper arm, ugly and raw, but it had missed the bone and the artery. As she worked to bind the wound, pulling the cloth tight to staunch the flow, the distance between them vanished. Caleb watched her. He watched the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way a stray lock of wet hair fell across her cheek. He had spent 10 years riding from town to town, hunting men for money, never staying long enough to learn a woman's name, let alone let one tend to his wounds. "He's gone, Caleb," Clara whispered, tying off the bandage. She looked up, her eyes searching his. "Miller, the posse. It's finally over." "The man is gone," Caleb corrected, his voice low and gravelly. "But the trouble ain't. That ranch of yours. The 00. With Miller dead, the bank creates a vacuum. Folks will come for the land. Drifters, carpetbaggers. It's hard work holding ground in this territory alone. Clara sat back on her heels, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She was a widow with an infant, a frozen bank account, and a ranch that had fallen into disrepair during the months she had been on the run. "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't pay you, Caleb, not yet. The inquiry into Thomas's death, the legal fees, it could take months to unfreeze the assets. I have nothing to give you but a thank you." Caleb looked out over the vast Wyoming landscape. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a piercing, impossible blue. The scent of wet sagebrush and pine filled the air. The smell of the west. He thought about the road ahead. Another town, another bounty, another cheap hotel room. It felt hollow. He looked back at Clara and the baby. He saw a fire in her that matched his own. "I never did care much for money," Caleb lied, shifting his gaze to his boots. "Burns a hole in my pocket anyway." He slowly got to his feet, testing the movement of his arm. It held. "What will you do?" Clara asked, standing up with him. There was a desperate hope in her voice she couldn't hide. She didn't want to walk back to that empty ranch house alone. Caleb walked over to Midnight, checking the cinch and patting the stallion's neck. He turned back, tipping the brim of his hat up so she could see his eyes clearly. "I hear the 00 is looking for a foreman," Caleb drawled. "Someone who can fix a fence, break a horse, and keeps a Winchester handy just in case the coyotes get too close." Clara stared at him, a flush rising to her cheeks. "The pay is terrible," she warned, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "And the bunkhouse roof leaks." "I can fix a roof," Caleb said softly. "And I work cheap, as long as the coffee is hot." The tension in Clara's chest finally broke. She laughed, a sound of pure relief. "I make the worst coffee in Laramie County, Caleb Thorne. I guess I'm willing to take that risk." Caleb extended his hand, not the hand of a bounty hunter, but the hand of a partner. Clara took it, her fingers interlacing with his. He pulled her close, effortlessly swinging her up behind his saddle one last time. "Let's go home, Clara," he said. As they rode down the trail toward the valley floor, the sun dipping low and painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, they weren't just two survivors. They were a family. The town of Cody would gossip for years about the rider who fell from the sky to save a drowning woman. But for Caleb and Clara, the legend didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the future waiting for them at the end of the trail. History is full of unsung heroes, but sometimes love and courage are loud enough to echo through the canyons of time. Did Caleb and Clara's story capture your heart? If you want more dramatic tales from the Wild West, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a legend. Thanks for watching.